I didn't know my entire future was about to collapse over a plate of half-eaten pasta on a random Tuesday night. I didn't know that the man I was engaged to, the man I had spent 4 years of my life trusting, would look at me and decide that cruelty was easier than honesty. And I definitely didn't know that when he smirked and called me a mistake, I would be calm enough to end everything without raising my voice. He said it like it was an observation, not a confession, like he was commenting on the weather instead of rewriting my life. He leaned back in his chair, swirling his wine, and told me that I was a rebound that went too far, that he had settled for me when he was hurt, that I was safe, convenient, and never really who he wanted. The smirk on his face made it worse. It wasn't regret. It wasn't guilt. It was amusement. I kept my voice flat. I didn't cry. I didn't argue. I just said, I understand. What he didn't realize was that in that moment, I wasn't accepting what he said. I was confirming what I had already begun to suspect. Something in him had shifted weeks ago. The secretive phone behavior, the emotional distance, the way he started speaking about our relationship like it was something that had happened to him, not something he had chosen. I didn't know the full truth yet, but I knew enough to stop begging for explanations. I stood up, walked to the front door, and checked the peephole like I was expecting a delivery. He frowned, confused. "What are you doing?" "There's someone here who should hear this conversation," I said, stepping aside. That was when his face drained of color. Because standing in the hallway, arms crossed, expression calm and unreadable, was my older sister, a family lawyer, someone who doesn't flinch when people show their worst sides, someone I had called 20 minutes earlier and asked to come over because I knew, deep down, that whatever was coming needed a witness. My fiancé thought he was ending our relationship on his terms. He thought I would break, plead, fight for him, give him the emotional reaction he wanted. What he wasn't prepared for was what happens when a woman stops reacting and starts handling things. And that night was only the beginning. Before that night, before the smirk and the word mistake cut through everything I thought I knew, my life with him felt solid in a way I trusted. I was 33, working in a stable field I had built carefully over the years, practical by nature, thoughtful with my decisions, not someone who rushed into commitment lightly. When I said yes to him, I meant it. I believed in choosing a partner deliberately, not impulsively, and I believed I had done exactly that. We met 4 years earlier at a friend's wedding, one of those events where strangers are thrown together and somehow everything just clicks. He was charming without being loud, confident without trying to dominate the room. He had a way of making people feel seen, asking questions that weren't superficial, laughing easily, drawing attention without demanding it. When we talked that night, it felt effortless, like we had already been mid-conversation in another life and were simply picking it back up. Dating him felt easy at first. He was attentive, present, emotionally articulate in a way that made me feel safe opening up. He talked about his past honestly, including his previous relationship, a 3-year partnership that ended about 6 months before we met. He told me it had ended badly, that they wanted different things, that he had been hurt and needed time to reset. I didn't press for details. Everyone has history. I respected that. Our relationship grew steadily. We dated for 2 years before he proposed, never rushing, never forcing milestones. He asked me in a quiet, intentional way, not flashy or performative, just sincere. When I said yes, he looked relieved, almost emotional, like this was something he had hoped for deeply. We celebrated with family and friends, no hesitation, no doubt, at least none that I could see. The engagement lasted 8 months. The wedding was planned for next spring. Venues were booked, deposits paid, guest lists discussed, colors chosen, all the normal things people do when they believe their future is secure. On the surface, everything looked perfect. We were that couple people pointed to and said, "They make sense together." Looking back, I can see the small fractures I dismissed, the way he grew quieter when the wedding came up, the way he sometimes spoke about our relationship in past tense, jokingly, like it was already behind him, the way his phone started to matter more than our conversations. I told myself it was stress. Everyone says weddings bring out strange behavior. I wanted to be understanding. I wanted to be supportive. His family adored me. His mother called me regularly, asked about plans, told me how excited she was to have me as a daughter-in-law. His friends treated me warmly, teased us about married life, talked about future gatherings. There was no warning from the outside, no obvious red flags waving for me to catch. That's what made it so devastating. I wasn't ignoring chaos. I was trusting consistency. By the time we sat down for that Tuesday night dinner, pasta and wine like any other ordinary evening, I still believed we were on the same path. I had no idea he had already begun rewriting our story in his head, reframing love as convenience and commitment as a mistake. And I had no idea that the next words out of his mouth would strip 4 years down to a punchline he seemed to enjoy delivering. In the weeks leading up to that dinner, the air between us had changed in ways that were subtle enough to explain away if you wanted to keep believing. I did want to keep believing. I told myself that tension was normal during engagement, that pressure makes people withdraw, that not every quiet moment is a warning. Still, my body noticed things before my mind was willing to name them. He was on his phone more than usual, always angling the screen away from me, always replying quickly and then setting it face down like it no longer mattered. When I asked who he was talking to, he shrugged and said it was nothing important. Work stuff, people checking in about wedding plans. His answers weren't defensive. That was the problem. They were smooth, practiced, designed to end the conversation before it began. Our conversations shifted too. Where we used to talk about the future with ease, now there were pauses. If I mentioned the wedding, he would smile, but not add anything. If I talked about plans beyond it, he would nod, distracted, like he was listening to something else entirely. I found myself filling the silence more often, explaining, reassuring, making space for his uncertainty without realizing that I was the only one doing the emotional labor. There were moments when I almost asked him directly if he was still happy, if this was what he wanted, if something had changed. The question sat right behind my teeth more than once. But every time, I stopped myself. I didn't want to sound insecure. I didn't want to create a problem where one didn't exist. I had been taught, like many women are, that being understanding is a virtue, that patience is proof of love. His behavior around his past began to surface in ways I hadn't noticed before. Small comments slipped out, casual references to who he used to be or what he thought he wanted back then. When his ex's name came up in conversation, it was never emotional, never angry, but not entirely neutral either. It was flat, like unfinished business disguised as indifference. I told myself it didn't matter. We all have a past. What matters is what you choose now. But the emotional distance kept growing. He stopped reaching for me automatically. Our evenings felt quieter, heavier, like we were both waiting for something neither of us wanted to say out loud. When I tried to bridge that gap, suggesting we talk, suggesting a weekend away, he said he was just tired, that work had been a lot, that I was reading too much into things. I started replaying recent memories in my head, looking for clarity. There was no single moment I could point to and say, this is when it went wrong. That's what made it so unsettling. It wasn't chaos. It was erosion. Little pieces of intimacy wearing away until I felt myself adjusting, shrinking my expectations, telling myself not to ask for too much. The night before that dinner, I lay awake longer than usual, staring at the ceiling, listening to him breathe beside me. I remember thinking how strange it was to feel lonely next to the person you're supposed to marry. I brushed the thought aside, embarrassed by it, unwilling to follow it where it wanted to lead. What I didn't know then was that while I was trying to preserve what we had, he had already begun reframing it. To him, those 4 years weren't shared effort anymore. They were a detour. And that realization, though I hadn't fully reached it yet, was already pulling us toward a confrontation that would change everything. That Tuesday night didn't start with tension. That was the cruelest part. It felt ordinary, almost comforting in its normalcy. Pasta on the stove, a bottle of wine we had already opened before, the kind of evening couples fall into when they've been together long enough to stop performing for each other. I remember thinking that maybe I had imagined the distance, that maybe tonight would be the reset I'd been quietly hoping for. He was quieter than usual, scrolling through his phone between bites, angling it away from me without even realizing he was doing it. I noticed, but I didn't comment. I didn't want to start another conversation that ended with reassurance I had to give myself. When he finally set the phone down and picked up his fork, I felt a strange sense of relief, like I'd passed some invisible test. "I need to talk to you about something," he said, placing the fork carefully on the plate. My stomach dropped instantly. Those words never come attached to good news. I looked at him, trying to read his face, but his expression was unfamiliar. Not nervous, not sad, almost amused. "Okay," I said, keeping my voice steady. "What's going on?" He took a sip of wine, slow and deliberate, like he was enjoying the pause. Then he leaned back slightly and said he'd been thinking a lot about us lately, about how we got together, about timing, about honesty. The way he said it made my skin prickle. This didn't feel like vulnerability. It felt rehearsed. Then he brought up his ex, the one he'd dated for 3 years before me, the one he'd always described as a closed chapter. He said she'd reached out a few weeks ago. Just to talk, he claimed. Just to catch up. My hands went cold around my glass as he spoke, my body reacting before my mind could keep up. They'd started talking more, being honest about the past, about why they really broke up. He swirled the wine in his glass as he explained that the story he'd told me wasn't true. He hadn't left because they wanted different things. He'd left because he was scared of commitment, because he panicked, because he ran. I asked him why he was telling me this now, my voice barely above a whisper. That's when he looked directly at me and smiled. Not kindly, not apologetically, cruelly. "Because I've realized something," he said. "You were a mistake. I settled for a rebound that went too far. I was hurt and you were safe, and I convinced myself that was enough." The words landed slowly, each one heavier than the last. A mistake, a rebound, safe. Settled for. I sat there frozen, my fork still in my hand, my chest tight like I'd forgotten how to breathe. He told me not to take it personally, said I was a good woman, just not her, that I was never going to be her. And then he smirked, like this revelation amused him. Something in me went very still. I set my fork down carefully, not because I was calm, but because I didn't trust my hands. I took a slow breath and said the only thing that felt honest in that moment. "I understand." He blinked, clearly not expecting that. He asked if that was it, if I wasn't going to fight, if I wasn't going to try to change his mind. I looked at him and asked why I would fight for someone who just called me a mistake. That was when I stood up, walked to the door, and checked the peephole. And that was the moment he realized he wasn't alone in this conversation anymore. I didn't raise my voice when I opened the door. I didn't need to. The sound that followed, the quiet click of the lock and the shift of space as I stepped aside, said everything. Standing in the hallway was my older sister, calm, composed, eyes already assessing the room the way she always does when something serious is unfolding. She's a family lawyer. She's seen people at their worst, and she doesn't scare easily. The moment my fiancé saw her, the color drained from his face. "What is she doing here?" he demanded, his confidence cracking for the first time that night. "I called her about 20 minutes ago," I said evenly. "I told her you needed to tell me something important, and that I wanted a witness." He laughed sharply, the sound brittle. "You had no right to do that." "I had every right," I replied. "You've been distant for weeks. Secretive. On your phone constantly. I'm not stupid. I knew something was coming. I just didn't know how cruel you planned to be about it." My sister stepped inside and closed the door behind her. She didn't look at him at first. She looked at me. Just once. A silent check-in. I nodded slightly, letting her know I was holding it together, at least for now. "I heard everything from the hallway," she said calmly. "Would you like to repeat what you just told my sister, for clarity?" He stood up so fast his chair scraped loudly against the floor. His face flushed, anger rushing in where control had slipped. He accused me of setting him up, of ambushing him, of turning a private conversation into a spectacle. "I gave you a chance to be honest," I said. "You chose to be vicious." "I was being honest," he snapped. "No," I said, my voice still flat. "You were being cruel. There's a difference. You could have said you were having doubts, that you needed time, that maybe we should postpone the wedding. Instead, you called me a mistake you settled for and smirked like it was entertaining." That's when my sister pulled out her phone. "I'm recording this now," she said. "For the record, you just told your fiancé that she was a rebound you never really loved, that you've been talking to your ex, and that you settled for her. Is that accurate?" His mouth opened, then closed. For the first time, he had nothing to say. The recording did two things immediately. It shut him up, and it snapped something into place inside me. The fog lifted, the shock receded. In its place was clarity, not emotional, not reactive, practical. "I want you out of the apartment," I said. "Tonight." His eyes widened. "This is my apartment too." "It's not," I replied. "My name is on the lease. You moved in 6 months ago. You're not on any paperwork." He turned to my sister, desperate. Is that legal? She shrugged. You're a guest. She's revoking that invitation. She's giving you notice to leave. I have belongings here, he protested. Pack what you can tonight, my sister said. We'll arrange a time for you to get the rest this week, with supervision. He looked at me then, really looked at me, like he was waiting for me to soften, to cry, to beg, to ask him to stay. I did none of those things. This is who you really are, he said coldly. No, I answered. This is who I become when someone I love tells me they never really love me back. He left soon after, slamming the door hard enough to rattle the walls. When the apartment fell silent, my sister asked if I was okay. Not even a little bit, I said. She nodded. Good. You shouldn't be, but you handled that correctly. She offered to stay. I told her I needed to be alone. After she left, I sat on the couch in an apartment that suddenly felt too big and stared at the wall until the sky outside began to lighten. By morning, the shock had settled into something heavier. Not panic, not hysteria, but responsibility. I didn't have the luxury of falling apart yet. There were practical things to handle, decisions that couldn't wait for my emotions to catch up. I made coffee I barely tasted and sat at the kitchen table, staring at the wedding binder that had been living on the counter for months. Color swatches, vendor contracts, a timeline that no longer belonged to me. I closed it slowly, took a breath, and picked up my phone. The first call was to my best friend, the one who was supposed to stand next to me as my maid of honor. I told her everything, not dramatically, not through tears, just facts in order. She offered to come over immediately. I told her not yet. I needed to get through the logistics before the emotions flooded in. She understood. She always does. Then I started calling vendors. The venue first. I explained that the engagement had ended and the wedding was canceled. I didn't offer details beyond that, but my voice must have carried enough weight because they softened immediately. They told me we were far enough out to receive a partial refund. Not everything, but enough to make it sting less. I thanked them, wrote down the numbers, and moved on. The photographer was easier. The contract hadn't been finalized yet. No loss there. The caterer was harder. We had already put down a significant deposit. I spoke calmly, explained that the engagement had ended due to infidelity, close enough to the truth to be accurate, and that I had documentation. I mentioned casually that my sister was a family lawyer who specialized in contract disputes. The tone of the conversation shifted. We negotiated. I didn't get everything back, but I recovered more than I expected. By noon, I had contacted every vendor. I did the math twice. I lost about $4,000. Painful, but survivable. My phone buzzed constantly while I worked. Messages from him started with apologies, then explanations, then accusations. He said I overreacted. He said I humiliated him. He said he didn't mean it the way it sounded. Finally, desperation. Can we please just talk? I didn't respond to any of it. I blocked his number. I blocked him on social media. I asked mutual friends not to pass along messages. I wasn't going to give him a stage to rewrite the story. That afternoon, my mother called. Her voice was tight, controlled. She told me his mother had called her, saying I kicked him out with nowhere to go, that I embarrassed him by bringing my sister into a private matter, that everything came out of nowhere. My mom asked me to tell her exactly what happened. I did. I told her about the dinner, the words, the smirk, the recording, the eviction. She was silent for a long moment. Then she said, "You're the one I'm worried about." She told his mother the truth, not gently, not harshly, clearly, that her son had been deliberately cruel, that he broke my heart and destroyed his own credibility, that if she wanted sympathy, she wouldn't find it in our family. Hearing that loosened something in my chest I hadn't realized was clenched. By the end of the day, exhaustion finally caught up to me. The adrenaline faded, the numbness cracked. I sat on the couch and cried for the first time since it happened, not because I wanted him back, because I had loved someone who never loved me the way I deserved, because I had built a future on a foundation that never existed, because letting go hurts even when it's necessary. And then, 3 days later, he showed up again. I found out he was downstairs because the building manager called me. His voice was cautious, professional, like he already knew this wasn't a normal situation. He said my ex-fiancée was in the lobby, claiming he needed to collect his belongings, and that I had previously asked not to let him upstairs without supervision. He asked what I wanted him to do. I stared at the wall for a long second, feeling the weight of everything settle into my chest again, and told him I would come down. I grabbed my phone, made sure it was recording, and took the elevator down. When the doors opened, I saw him sitting on one of the lobby chairs, shoulders slumped, eyes tired, like someone who had rehearsed regret all night. When he saw me, he stood up immediately, relief flashing across his face as if my presence meant the outcome was still negotiable. "I've been trying to reach you for days," he said. "We need to talk." "We don't," I replied. "You need to get your things." I told him he had 30 minutes. I would supervise. Then he would leave. No discussions. No revisiting the past. He nodded, quiet now, and followed me back upstairs without another word. The apartment felt different with him in it again. Smaller. He moved slowly through the rooms, packing clothes, books, bathroom items, stopping often like he wanted to say something but didn't know where to start. In the bedroom, he finally turned to me and said he'd made a mistake, that he was confused, that he was scared, that he'd said things he didn't mean. I listened without interrupting, my hands steady at my sides, my heart pounding in a way that surprised me. When he finished, I told him the truth. He meant them when he said them. Regret doesn't erase intention. Therapy, time, space, none of that mattered now. He asked if I still loved him. I thought about it carefully before answering. I told him I loved who I thought he was. I didn't know who he actually was anymore, and I didn't want to. That broke something in him. Real tears followed. Not dramatic, not manipulative, just desperate. He apologized again. He said he didn't want to lose me. "You already did," I said quietly. "The moment you called me a mistake." He packed the rest of his things in silence. 3 suitcases, 2 boxes. I helped him carry them to his car because I wanted the end to be clean. At the door, he turned to me one last time and said he really did love me. I told him maybe he did now, but he didn't when it mattered. Then I went back upstairs alone. That night, the apartment was empty in a way it had never been before. No arguments, no tension, just space. I sat on the couch and let myself feel it all at once. The grief, the anger, the betrayal, the exhaustion. This was the lowest point, not because I doubted my decision, but because I finally allowed myself to feel the cost of it. I didn't sleep much. I watched the city lights shift outside the window until morning came. And somewhere between the dark and the dawn, I realized that even at my lowest, I had not begged, chased, or compromised my dignity. That mattered more than I knew at the time. The turning point didn't arrive with a dramatic announcement or a sudden rush of confidence. It came quietly, through information I hadn't asked for but needed to hear. A few days after he finished moving his things out, a mutual friend asked if we could meet for coffee. She sounded uneasy on the phone, like she was carrying something heavy and didn't know where to put it. I almost said no. Part of me was tired of learning new details that only confirmed what I already knew. But something told me this was different. She didn't waste time with small talk. She told me that what happened between us hadn't been a single conversation gone wrong. It had been building for months. He had been emotionally involved with his ex long before that dinner, meeting her, lying about where he was, slowly reconnecting while still sharing a bed with me. Not physical, she said, but intimate enough to cross every boundary that mattered. He'd been telling people he felt trapped, that he loved me but wasn't in love, that he didn't know how to leave without looking like the villain. Hearing that didn't break me, it settled me. For the first time, the entire story made sense. The distance, the phone, the rehearsed cruelty, the smirk. He hadn't just been honest that night. He'd been relieved. Relieved to finally unload the truth in a way that made him feel powerful instead of guilty. Understanding that shifted something deep inside me. I stopped wondering if I had overreacted. I stopped replaying my tone, my words, my choices. I hadn't ended the relationship, I had responded to its ending. A few days later, another confirmation arrived from an unexpected source. His ex-best friend reached out, hesitant, apologetic, saying she felt uncomfortable watching him rewrite history. She told me he had gone back to his ex almost immediately after leaving my apartment, presenting himself as free, misunderstood, wounded by a relationship that was never quite right. She told me it didn't last. The same issues surfaced quickly, the same fear, the same dishonesty. He had been called out for stringing both of us along, and the relationship collapsed under the weight of its own contradictions. I didn't feel satisfaction, I felt release. That was the moment I understood my power had never been in controlling the outcome. It had been in refusing to participate in the lie. I hadn't screamed. I hadn't begged. I hadn't tried to convince him of my worth. I had simply listened, documented the truth, and acted accordingly. The presence of my sister that night mattered more than I realized at first, not just legally, but emotionally. She had given me a witness so I couldn't gaslight myself later, a timestamp on the truth. I sat alone that evening, surrounded by the quiet I had earned, and made a decision that felt small but changed everything. I stopped explaining myself to friends, to family, to anyone who asked for more details than they deserved. I told the truth once, clearly, and then I let it stand on its own. People who needed to know believed me. People who didn't were not my responsibility. I packed away the wedding binder and moved it out of sight. Not in anger, in closure. I canceled the last remaining vendor details. I closed shared accounts. I changed passwords. I reclaimed my routines. Each action was simple, practical, grounding. Each one said the same thing. I choose myself. The realization wasn't that I was strong. It was that I didn't need to prove strength at all. I needed boundaries. I needed clarity. I needed to stop mistaking endurance for love. When someone shows you who they are at the moment it costs them nothing, believe them. When they show you who they are when it costs them everything, believe that even more. That night, I slept through until morning for the first time in weeks. And when I woke up, I didn't feel healed. I felt oriented, like I finally knew which direction was forward. The consequences didn't arrive with noise. They arrived with distance, with people choosing sides quietly, with conversations happening without my name in them anymore, with a slow reshaping of social circles that made it clear who was paying attention and who was committed to protecting a comfortable lie. I didn't insert myself into any of it. I didn't correct stories unless someone asked me directly. I didn't defend myself aggressively. The truth had already been spoken, witnessed, recorded, and acted on. Everything after that belonged to him. His family reacted in stages. His mother reached out first, her tone cautious, almost apologetic, asking if there had been some kind of misunderstanding. I told her calmly that there hadn't been. I didn't repeat his words verbatim. I didn't dramatize. I simply said that he told me I was a mistake he settled for, that he had been emotionally involved with his ex, and that I ended the engagement because I refused to marry someone who didn't choose me freely. There was a long pause on the line. She said she needed time. I told her I understood. His father never called me. I wasn't surprised. Some people don't confront things that make them uncomfortable. I didn't take it personally. Their silence wasn't my burden to carry. Among mutual friends, the split was clearer. A few reached out immediately, furious on my behalf, shocked that he could speak to me the way he did. Others stayed neutral, uncomfortable, unwilling to engage with the reality that someone they liked had behaved badly. I noticed who asked how I was doing and who asked what really happened. Those questions revealed priorities more than loyalty ever could. The narrative he tried to push didn't hold for long. He told people we had a fight, that things were said in the heat of the moment, that I overreacted. But stories like that require consistency, and his didn't have it. Too many details contradicted each other. Too many people remembered how confident and cruel he sounded when he spoke about ending things. Too many knew he had gone back to his ex immediately. The image he tried to preserve cracked under its own weight. About 2 weeks after he moved out, I heard through mutual friends that he and his ex had officially gotten back together. I wasn't surprised. It confirmed everything. What did surprise me was how quickly it fell apart. Less than 2 weeks later, they broke up again. This time, she ended it. Apparently, she discovered he had been minimizing the overlap between our relationships, presenting himself as freer than he actually was. Being lied to doesn't feel romantic when you're on the receiving end. Around the same time, one of his closest friends reached out to me privately. We had always been cordial, not especially close, but honest with each other. He told me he felt guilty staying silent while my ex painted himself as misunderstood. He said he had heard the way my ex talked about me in the weeks before the breakup. The jokes, the dismissive comments, the way he framed me as a safety net instead of a partner. Hearing that hurt, but it also removed the last lingering doubt. I hadn't imagined the shift. I hadn't misread it. I had simply trusted longer than I should have. The wedding fallout was quieter but still present. Invitations that would never be sent sat unopened in a drawer. Deposits lost were absorbed gradually, transformed from symbols of waste into reminders of what I avoided losing. Every time I thought about the money, I reminded myself that it was the cost of clarity, not failure. A small price compared to a lifetime spent with someone who saw me as a placeholder. I moved through my days with a strange mix of grief and lightness. I missed the version of my life I had planned. I didn't miss him. That distinction mattered. The apartment began to feel different, no longer heavy with expectation, no longer filled with tension I had been managing subconsciously. I rearranged furniture, changed routines, made the space reflect who I was again, not who I had been trying to be for someone else. I didn't celebrate his discomfort. I didn't take satisfaction in his fallout. I simply stepped aside and let the truth land where it needed to. Watching someone face consequences without my involvement was a lesson in itself. I didn't need to punish him. Reality was doing that on its own. And while his world narrowed, mine quietly stabilized. The people who mattered stayed. The noise faded. And for the first time since the engagement began, I felt something close to peace. 4 months after the engagement ended, my life no longer felt like something I had to recover. It felt like something I was actively rebuilding, piece by piece, with intention. The quiet in the apartment stopped feeling empty and started feeling spacious. Mornings belonged to me again. Evenings unfolded without tension or second guessing. I wasn't bracing myself for moods, silences, or explanations that never quite made sense. I was simply living. People kept asking if I was okay, and for a while I didn't know how to answer. Okay felt too small for what I was becoming. I wasn't healed in a neat, finished way, but I was grounded. I trusted my instincts again. I no longer questioned whether my standards were too high or my expectations unreasonable. I had learned, painfully but clearly, that love is not proven by endurance. It's proven by choice, especially when choosing is inconvenient. I took time off work around the date the wedding would have been. Instead of standing in a dress I no longer owned, I traveled alone to a place I had always wanted to see. No itinerary built around someone else. No compromises. Just me, my thoughts, and the quiet understanding that I hadn't lost a future. I had escaped one that would have required me to keep shrinking. I went on a few dates after that, nothing serious, just conversations over coffee, shared laughter without pressure. What surprised me most wasn't how different those men were from my ex, but how differently I showed up. I didn't perform. I didn't over-explain. I paid attention to actions instead of words. When something felt off, I didn't talk myself out of it. I listened. Looking back, I don't believe my ex was a villain in the dramatic sense. I think he loved comfort, stability, the idea of being loved without having to choose deeply. When his past resurfaced and demanded courage, he chose cruelty instead, not because he wanted to hurt me, but because hurting me was easier than confronting himself. That doesn't make him evil, it makes him unsafe. The lesson I carry forward isn't about revenge or winning. It's about self-respect. When someone tells you they settled for you, believe them. When they show you that your presence is conditional on their comfort, walk away. You don't need to prove your worth to someone who benefits from questioning it, and you don't need closure from someone who only tells the truth when it costs them nothing. I don't hate him. I don't wish him harm. I simply don't make space for people who see love as a convenience instead of a commitment. The future I'm building now is quieter, sturdier, and entirely my own. And whoever I let into it next will know one thing from the beginning. I am not a backup plan. I am not a mistake. And I will never settle for being settled for again.